Hello friends, welcome to Learn with Lakshman. Today we'll talk about criteria of good research. That is, what is being scientific?
The most important word in a research is scientific. It needs to be scientific. Okay. So when we are talking about criteria of good research, we must think that it should be scientific. Now, if we look at all types of research, let us see whatever may be the type of research work and studies, they all meet on a common ground. And what is that common ground? That common ground is scientific method employed by them. The common ground is scientific method employed by them. We, as a researcher or a supervisor or all other people, expect scientific research to fulfill some criteria. I mean, what is being scientific? When I say that research must be scientific, what is being scientific? That is what we have to understand. And that is what we call the criteria of good research. We're going to talk about that. See, as a researcher, whatever is the research proposal, it should have a clearly defined purpose. Once again, I'm trying to tell it to you. As a researcher, your research proposal should have a clearly defined purpose. Now, what is the clearly defined purpose? What is the intention of your research? Why are you carrying out a particular kind of research? That is the purpose. If you take a synopsis of any of the earlier student or teacher, you will find that there are objectives of the research. Objectives. Some people write them as general objectives and specific objectives and all that. But when you write the objective of the research, the first objective should be the objective that clearly defines the purpose of your research as to why I am doing this research. This is the first thing, that research should have a clearly defined purpose. This is the first criteria, that it should have a clearly defined purpose. And another thing is that it should also clearly define the concepts used in the research. If you are talking about a few concepts in your research, say for instance, if you are taking research about language learning strategies, so you should first of all clearly define what are the language learning strategies, right? Or if you are taking research in the area of post-humanism, you should clearly define what is post-humanism, what are other concepts used in the post-humanism, and so on. So clearly defined purpose and clearly defined common concepts is very important in the research. Second is, one should give clear description of the procedure as to how you are going to carry out this research. First, you're defining the purpose of your research. Then you're clearly defining as to how you're carrying out this research. That is the description of the procedure of the research. Research is systematic. We've seen that research is systematic. It is scientific as well as systematic. One has to follow a proper method to reach a few conclusions or reach the conclusions of your research. So this procedure should also be clearly defined. One should give clear description of the process as to how I am going to carry out my research. First, we have to define clearly what is the purpose of our research and what are the concepts that have been used in the research. It should be clearly defined. Second, we should give clear description of the procedure of the research as to how this research is being carried out. That is. Okay, why do we do this? There is a reason. Because some other researcher should repeat this procedure and should use the same procedure for the further advancements in your research. and she should be able to keep continuity of what has already been attained by you in your research. Let us say, for example, a researcher has taken a topic, the use of language learning strategies in colleges affiliated to Swami Ramananda Tirth Marathwada University, Nanded. This is one topic. Let us consider that this is an example. Now, the method the researcher has employed. Say, for instance, researcher has employed the method of questionnaire. Researcher has prepared an extensive questionnaire. It has been sent to all the teachers or in all the colleges affiliated to this university. He sought their responses and then analyzed them and reached a conclusion. Okay, this is the procedure. This is the clear procedure that one should define. Researcher should define this procedure, that this is the procedure, and by using this procedure, I have reached these conclusions. Okay, so this same procedure should be used by other researchers. Say, for instance, some other researcher will choose the topic, the use of language learning strategies in colleges affiliated to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad. This is the possibility. This is one thing. Some other researcher would also use the same topic, and instead of language learning strategies, some other researcher would use the title, the use of language teaching strategies, right? So these are some of the things. This procedure should allow the other researcher to repeat the research for further advancement, and should be able to keep continuity of what has already been attained. That is very important. We've seen two things. It should have clearly defined purpose, clearly defined concepts that are being used in the research, and the last one is the researcher should give clear description of the procedure. Number 3, there should be careful planning of procedural design, procedural design that the researcher is going to use should be designed extremely carefully. Careful design is very important because the researcher intends to yield the objective results, and one should try to yield as much objective results as possible, and therefore the procedural design should be carefully planned. There should be meticulous planning of the procedure that is to be followed in the research. Okay, these are the 3 things we have seen, right? Clearly defined purpose and concepts, and second is clearly defined procedure, and third is now careful planning of the procedure. These are the things we have seen. Now it is the time of reporting. After doing all these things, what a researcher has to do? Researcher has to report. So what should researcher do when researcher is reporting? Researcher should report with complete frankness. Researcher should be frank enough to report if there are some flaws in the procedural design. I mean, if there is some sort of flaw in the procedural design, the researcher should report that this is a flaw in the procedural design. If it is done, what happens? Researcher will be able to estimate its effect upon the findings. Researcher will be able to estimate its effect upon the findings. I mean, what effect is made by this particular flaw on the findings or on the result. I mean, if there is some flaw in the procedural design, that's what we are talking about. If there is some flaw in the procedural design, researcher should frankly report it. The flaw in the procedural design should be frankly reported by the researcher. Now, let us have an example of the same. The use of language learning strategies in colleges affiliated to Swami Ramananda Tirth Marathwada University, Nanded. Same topic. Now, researcher has prepared a design. What is the design? Design is researcher has prepared a questionnaire. Okay, he has taken an extensive survey of language learning strategies, listed all the language learning strategies, and then he has prepared an extensive questionnaire in which he has asked several questions to the teachers, and teachers have responded to these questions. Now, what is the flaw in this research? Researcher should tell that in this research, the responses of the students are not taken into consideration, or they are not at all sought. So that is the problem in this. But that is the flaw. But what is its effect on the results? Its effect is that students have not spoken, but then it's a research which is based on the responses given by the teachers, because teachers teach the language learning strategies, and therefore this research is based on the responses taken from teachers. What is the flaw? Flaw is there are no responses sought from the students. So teachers should report these flaws and also talk about the possible effects of those flaws in the research. Okay. Next is the analysis of data should be sufficiently adequate to reveal its significance, and the methods of analysis used should be appropriate. Analysis of the data should be sufficiently adequate. I mean, how many questionnaires? Say for instance, if it is about the questionnaires, how many questionnaires you will send to teachers, or how many responses you will take from the teachers, or how many teachers you will take the responses? Because there are 200 colleges. For instance, there are 200 colleges in the affiliated to this university. Now, if there are 200 colleges affiliated to this university, are you going to all the 200 colleges and all the 3 teachers from each college? How many responses are you seeking? You shouldn't just, okay, I'll go to one college in urban area and I'll go to one college in rural area. That is also not enough. You will have to select the colleges, adequate number of colleges. You will have to have adequate data and sufficient analysis of that data. Okay. And you should also use proper methods of analysis for that data. Next is careful assessment of the validity and reliability of the data. If you seek the data, we should also assess the data, carefully assess the data if data with me is valid, if it is valid or not. Because it is quite possible that someone might give you wrong reports, okay, or you may have misleading reports in your questionnaires. Sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes you can have those reports. In that case, one should be careful enough to assess the validity of the data, and one should also see how reliable this particular data is. Is the data really reliable? That is, okay, can we rely on this data? Can we depend on this data for the further research that we should see? Okay, next is conclusions confined to those, remember, conclusions confined to those justified by the data of the research and limited to those for which the data provide an adequate basis. Conclusions should be confined where? To those justified by the data. Whatever conclusion I have drawn from my research, it should be justified by the data I have collected. And I have different data and my conclusion shouldn't be different. The conclusion should be justified by the data, and conclusions should be limited to those which the data provide, an adequate basis for. Data should provide adequate basis for the conclusions drawn in the research. That is important for us. Okay, what is important? Experience of researcher. See, this is also important. Experience of researcher. If researcher is experienced, it'll be easy for him, her to carry out the research. And moreover, she will be serious in carrying out the research book, because it becomes easy for an experienced researcher to understand the procedure, to reach the conclusions, and everything, to do everything rigorously. Okay, then there is something called integrity of the researcher. Researcher's integrity is also important. If there is no integrity in anything, then it becomes useless for all of us. So that shouldn't be there. Integrity should be there. Researcher's integrity is important. Researcher's experience is important. And see, this is a kind of off the record thing, but there is some truth in it. Integrity is okay. There should be honesty of the researcher. Researcher should be honest enough. Reputation of the researcher is also important in the research, because if researcher's reputation is that he doesn't report things, she doesn't report things frankly, flaws frankly, then it is of no use, because that will not be the proper research. Okay, this is what we are talking about. The main topic that we have discussed, what was it? It was the criteria of good research.
Thank you very much for watching.